When do you, as in me, when do I invoke the burden of proof? Right, so judging by the critique of Andrew's video, I'm going to have to be very careful how I phrase this. So let me start off with when the burden of proof is normally used here on YouTube among our little community. It's always used in the case of trying to prove the existence of God. Now, the problem is here that if you want to try and prove that something doesn't exist, is that feasible? Is that something you can actually do? And I would contest right now that, well, I would claim right now that it's just not. And I'm going to explain why. Now, first of all, let's say this room. Let's say God exists. Let's say someone's making the claim that God exists in this room. They ask me to try and disprove that. There's a finite amount of space. And, well, if I use my eyes, I see nothing that could possibly look a bit like a God in this room. You know, I'll give you a bit of a... Yep. I think you'll agree with me that there's no God in here. Now, I can't smell God. I wouldn't know what he smells like anyway. I can't taste God. That would be incredibly strange. I can't hear God. I know some people claim to hear him talking to them. That's a talk for another time. And what sense am I missing? I can't feel God. And again, people say that they can feel his presence. I can't. Maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. But there we go. I've exhausted the use of all five senses and no God. Now, there's also the electromagnetic spectrum. You have light that you can see. You've got ultraviolet light, infrared. You could scan you could scan the whole spectrum. And if you can't find God there, then you can't prove. Then you've scanned all of that and you get no God. Now, is that everything? No, some people like to weasel their way out of it. Some people like to say that God exists on a kind of spiritual level. Now, can you prove a claim like that? No. There is no way of accessing this spiritual realm. So can it be tested? Can this claim that God exists on a spiritual level be tested or verified in any way? No. And as long as that's the case, it's impossible to disprove the existence of God. And in that case, the burden of proof is something that has to exist. If not, then, well, you could really claim that anything exists on this spiritual level. And since there's no way of disproving it, then, yeah, I think I've made my point there. So I would say that the burden of proof gets used, and I would certainly use it when proving the opposite, proving the non-existence of something is impossible. Now, I want to take a look at the points of contention that Javier raised on Andrew's video. I have it open on the screen. I'm just going to very quickly take a look. First he says, number one, you claim that anyone making a positive assertion has the burden of proof, but then only go on to use examples of positive ontological claims, i.e. X exists. What about other types of claims? Well, let's take a look at the ones that Javier raised. You know, the lawsuit, the criminal, criminal cases, and cases where one person is suing another. Now, in criminal cases, what you're trying to do is you're trying to, the prosecutor is trying to show that the defendant is guilty, and, the defense lawyer, I can't remember if there's a fancy term for that. I'm going to try and do this continuously. the defence lawyer tries to defend the accused. Now, what's happening is that if the prosecutor wins, the defendant is being sent to jail or fined, or in very extreme cases, being put to death. Now, that would warrant that they be absolutely sure about the decision if they're going to do something that, well, cruel, if you like, to the defendant. I don't know, you get what I'm trying to say. If you're going to do some act that causes this amount of harm or puts the defendant in this really uncomfortable position, either way, then it only makes sense to me that they would have to be sure about what's being accused here. So, the accusation that's being made, that they want to be sure that they've got the decision right. Now, in the case of suer versus suee, this is where I disagree with the established convention, and I think there should be a burden of proof on the suer, for the simple reason that when you sue someone, they are going to have to pay you a lot of money, so you're going to have to show beyond any reasonable doubt that the claim that the suer is making is accurate. To answer the second point that Javier raised, why should there need to be a burden of proof at all? Why can't both sides just present their arguments and then decide based on who has a better argument? Well, like I said before, in cases where proving the opposite is impossible, then the burden of proof is required. And like I said, I think it should also be in criminal cases, because the individual in this case could end up going to jail or having a fine, or, like I said, being executed. Then they should be very sure of their decision, so the burden of proof really should be on the person making the accusation. Number 3, what about when both parties make contradictory positive assertions? For example, my brother ate the cookies. Well, when it comes to, a selection of people that might have eaten the cookies, then simply all you have to do is one person has to provide evidence that all the evidence is pulled together. It doesn't really matter who presents it, but there is no burden of proof in this case. It's simply up to someone to present evidence as to who actually ate the cookies. I hope that's clear enough. Right, number 4 is quite interesting. Your argument is itself a positive assertion, meaning that you have the burden of proof. However, due to the problems listed above, I believe that you have failed to meet that burden. In other words, Javier is saying, prove that you have the burden of proof. Now, here's the thing which the thing is, you can't prove that you have the burden of proof. It's a concept. It's not something you can say, well, this person definitely has it. The idea of this whole burden of proof is subjective. It's something we came up with. But, due to the reasons that I've given, I think that its use in cases where proving the opposite is impossible is required. Otherwise, you could claim that any number of things exist which you just can't disprove, like I said. And of course, the guilty party has, it has to be proven beyond all reasonable doubt that that person is guilty, just because of how grave the consequences are of that person being guilty. So, I think that was a rough paraphrasing of everything I've just said, and I've no idea how long this video is going to be, probably absolutely massive, but Javier, I hope I somewhat succeeded at your question. It was a very interesting one, and yeah, thank you for watching. Goodbye.